The story begins at a magical academy where our protagonist named Vil Serfort, who has no aptitude for magic, but since he lacks any form of magic, he makes up for it by using the sword to strike down his enemies. One day in class, Professor Edward is giving a lesson on how people can produce fire with the aid of catalysts and some magic, but all the students in class you could choose from, he decides to call on Vil to demonstrate the experiment, knowing he's unable to use magic. He does this because he's a high-level hater, but Vil has no choice but to obey his order, so he walks up to the front of the class and begins trying to make the spell work, but predictably, nothing happens, so the whole class wastes no time in mocking him for his repeated failures. Edward tells them all to calm down. That's just because he wants to personally roast Vil for being incapable of such a rudimentary spell. Vil excels at magical theory, but he has no magical talent whatsoever, so Edward despises him for thinking he can attend magic school without any magic. One student in his class casts the fire spell for his seat to ignite the catalyst in front of Vil, and while Edward isn't concerned for Vil's safety at all, it would still be bad for his record if his student burned to death, so he asked Shaun to refrain from doing reckless things like that in the future. Shaun apologizes and says he was just trying to help a little since Vil obviously isn't going to be able to do the demonstration, but with that said, Edward concludes the experiment and begins a speech about how magic is supreme in this world, so people who have no talent for have no right to exist in this magic academy, and all this is said while making direct eye contact with Vil. After class, Vil feels exhausted from all the hate he was getting, but people love hating on him, so Shaun follows him out of class to continue messing with Vil. Luckily, there is still some people who are on Vil's side as Colette comes running to his defense. Shaun asks why Colette is defending Vil when she's an honor student and Vil is half a point away from dropping out of school, but she says that doesn't matter since Vil is the nicest person she's ever met and he works much harder than any of them ever have. Shaun is stunned for a moment, but then he begins laughing since no matter how kind or hardworking Vil is, it won't change the fact that he can't use magic, and Vil is certainly never going to become Magia Vander without magic. Shaun and his friends leave Vil alone for now after that, so while walking together, Colette tells Vil not to be bothered by what Shaun and Professor Edward were saying since they just did it to humiliate him, and Vil says it's fine since he really isn't able to use magic, and besides, he considers himself lucky since their hating made a cute girl like Colette want to hang out with him. Colette gets embarrassed when he says this, so she tells Vil that flattery isn't going to make her want to go out with him, but Vil says he was just stating a fact since he thinks Colette is really cute. This gets Colette even more embarrassed and she nearly falls for Vil in the spot, so she pushes him away for a bit so she can think clearly and remain calm. She's technically a noble, so she can't let herself fall in love so easily. After regaining her composure, she looks over to Vil, but he is busy looking at the sky since it is especially beautiful today. Long ago, the people of this world lived in a constant shroud of darkness, in fear of the celestial host who ruled over them. However, that all changed when the 5 wizards against them joined forces to oppose the celestial and bring the light of the sky to everyone. These wizards tend to be known as the Magia Vander, and they are regarded as the epitome of magic, so no mages alive to date have ever been able to live up to the title. Colette wonders if the Ice Maiden Albizvina is washing over them right now, and Vil says he's sure she is because he knows for a fact that she is looking at them right now from her window at the top of the world. Back when Vil was younger, he had a childhood friend called Elfaria, and she would tell him all about the sun and moon she read about at Sarah books. She was especially excited to see the sunset since it is supposedly really pretty, so she hoped they could become Magia Vanders together someday and see the sun together. Vil promised to become a Magia Vander with her, but while it may have just been a promise between children, Elfaria actually worked hard to make it happen, and soon enough, she had climbed to the top of the towers through all her hard work. In contrast, Vil had no talent at all to keep his promise, yet he is still trying his best to make it up the tower even if it is just a delusional dream. However, even with his rock-solid resolve, it doesn't stop him from crumbling like a cookie when he gets scolded. Vil asks Professor Werkner to calm down a bit, but Werkner is rightfully angry since Vil went into the dungeon again despite knowing how dangerous it was, and all the way down to the 7th floor too. He's worrying Vil will end up getting himself killed at this rate, so Vil begs him for forgiveness, but he also asks if he can get his extra credit now. Werkner is still mad at him for going into the dungeon alone, and Vil was able to return with proof that he killed an evil guard, so he is awarded with 2 points of extra credit. Vil celebrates with his pet while Werkner does the paperwork ready, but as he does so, he asks Vil if he still hasn't given up on becoming a Magia Vander. In order to become one, Vil would first need to advance to a higher institute, and to do that he would need a total of 7,200 credits. Normally students would accumulate these credits in subjects like writing, practice, and spell work, but since Vil can't use magic, he will never earn any credits from still work. Vil is already aware of this, which is why he wanted to make up for it by doing extra work in practice, but Werkner has already explained to him that it is practically impossible to earn enough credits to pass through practice alone. Vil realizes his chances are slim, but he still wants to hold on to hope that he can fulfill his promise of becoming a Magiavander. In any case, Werkner tells Vil that Magiavander is a long way off and may not even graduate he doesn't start earning more credits. Werkner heard that Vil failed to earn any credits during his last exam, so unless he wants to flunk, he has to earn an additional 4 credits by the end of the week. Vil was shocked because that means he only has 2 days left before the deadline, so if no other options left, he begins searching his notes in hopes of finding a monster he can kill that is worth 4 credits. He is really desperate to find something, so while Werkner doesn't want to encourage Vil to go into the dungeon, he tells him about a Baskerville monster on the 6th floor of the dungeon, and Vil hasn't submitted that one yet, so he could get the required credits from killing it. Vil runs up to Werkner to hug him as thanks for all the help he has offered him, but Werkner tells him not to cling so tightly because he could put his job on the line. Unfortunately, Shaun happened to be outside Werkner's office during a whole conversation, so he knows that Vil is planning to go into the dungeon to slay Baskerville and is a true hater. He plans to head down there to kill it first so Vil won't be able to get enough credits to remain in the school. A while later, Vil arrives on the 6th floor of the dungeon, and he's in a pretty good mood since he's fought at Baskerville before, so it should be an easy win for him. His pet doesn't think it's a good idea for Vil to go into this with so much confidence, but Vil says there's nothing for him to worry about since as long as he is careful about the Baskerville's flame breath he won't get burnt to a crisp like last time, but in order to find the Baskerville, he is depending on Kiki to sniff it out. Meanwhile, Shaun and his friends are on their heading-ass mission to ensure that Vil drops out of the academy. His friends are equally hating on Vil, so they plan to kill the Baskerville first, and after that, they'll beat up Vil to send a message. They are all on board with the plan, but one of his friends asks if it is really safe for them to be this deep in the dungeon when only 3 of them here, but Shaun takes offense to the question, saying he is more than enough to keep all of them safe. The others let it go since they don't want to make Shaun mad, so Shaun keeps walking while continuing to internally hate on Vil. Instead, opinions someone who wasn't able to use magic shouldn't even dare to speak of the Magiavanders, so the very sight of Vil offends him. Once they've gotten deep into the dungeon, Shaun turns around to brief his friends on what they need to do, but a second later, one of his friends gets punched so hard that he slams into a wall, and there's no way that dude survived this. Shaun remains calm as he faces the monster, but the other guy starts freaking the hell out. Vil hears the shrieks of the guy and he instantly realizes that someone must be in trouble, so he rushes over to help. He can't believe there are other people this deep in the dungeon, but from the sound he just heard they can't be too far away, as Vil arrives at the site of all the screaming and he hides behind a wall and spots someone desperately shooting fireballs at the monster while pissing their pants. But none of his attacks are having any effect. That monster is an evil sentinel, and from what Vil knows is worth 10 points. Vil has never seen one in person before because the sentinel's habitat should be deeper down in the dungeon, so it makes no sense why it would come up to the 6th floor. More importantly, the person it is attacking is Shaun, and none of his spells are having any effect on the sentinel, so he doesn't stand a chance. The first thought that comes to Vil's mind is to go save Shaun, but then he takes a moment to think and comes to the conclusion. He's been hitting on him since day 1, so why should Vil feel any obligation to save him now since no one would know, he just left him to die. He's about to close his eyes and pretend he was never here, but then he has a flashback to a time with Elfaria, when she told him that she liked how kind and brave Vil was, which is why she gave him a pair of goggles as a gift. Vil still have that same pair of goggles this day, and if he wants to continue being the same person Elfaria has always liked, he has to put his personal grudges aside and save Shaun, even if he's a bitch. As the sentinel was about to kill Shaun, Vil jumps in and blocks the strike with his sword. At the same time, back in the academy, Professor Edward comes running into Werkner's office to tell them that Shaun and his friends have all gone into the dungeon together without permission. He wants Werkner there to use his familiar to track them down before they get themselves killed, so Werkner grabs his bird and asks what for Shaun went to. Edward answers that they should be on the 6th floor, and as soon as Werkner hears that, he is relieved since that means Vil is with them, and as long as he is there he can handle any monster that attacks. He uses his crystal ball to show Edward what Vil is doing right now, and he's going toe-to-toe with the sentinel, and he is absolutely blitzing it. In the blink of an eye, Vil is already chopped off one of the sentinel's fingers, and when the sentinel tries to counterattack, He blocks the strike mid-air and backs up to create some space. Vil then dashes in once more and the Sentinel can't keep up with him at all, so before it even realizes what's going on, Vil has already gotten on top of it and stabbed into his shoulder. Xiaon can't believe what he's seeing since he never thought Vil would be this so strong. Even Edward is left in shock, so Werkner explains to him that Vil is an amazing anomaly. He possesses superhuman strength that a mage could never hope to achieve. He has a body that's more durable than a Nokia phone and unbelievably accurate observational skills that allow him to grasp an enemy's strategy and form countermeasures for it after being attacked once, so as the Sentinel tries to slash Vil again, he's able to perfectly predict the attack and dodge, while also slicing off the Sentinel's arm in the process. Vil may not be able to use magic, however. He is more than capable of making up for it with his sword. As the Sentinel rises in pain, Vil proceeds to grab the Sentinel sword with one hand and prepares to finish off once and for all. The Sentinel fires off a plasma blast, has its last-ditch effort, but a single swing from Vil's sword is far more powerful, so Vil slices the Sentinel in half, claiming his victory. Once it's all over, Vil walks over to Xiaon, asked if he is okay, and Xiaon still has a grudge against Vil, but Vil just saved his life, so he bites his tongue. However, even after witnessing that whole fight how capable Vil is, it doesn't stop Edward from hating when harder, since you won't stand for magicless being stronger than students with magic. Edward leaves Werkner's office in a rage, and while Werkner is proud of Vil for saving Xiaon, he is still mad at him for putting himself in danger. However, once again he managed to defeat the monsters, so Werkner awards Vil with 10 points for killing the Sentinel. The story continues. We see 5 years ago, Vil was the laughingstock of the whole school due to his lack of magic, and apparently the only reason he was allowed to enroll here in the first place was because he was friends with Elfaria, but since she had already become a magia vendor at the time, there was no reason for the school to pretend to be nice to him anymore. Vil has had to endure all the ridicule this entire time, but hasn't stopped him from working hard to graduate regardless. Werkner accompanied Vil to be evaluated by the headmistress, and she obviously had her doubts about whether Vil was cut out for the school or not, but once she hands him a sword and begins to test, Vil is able to counter each and every one of her fire spells within a fraction of a second. She's so impressed that she says Vil is allowed to stay at the school, and Werkner's if it's surprised since he didn't think it would be this easy to convince her. It is true that Vil doesn't have any magic, but more importantly she thinks it'll be fun to have someone like Vil around. Vil asks the headmistress if he can be by Elfaria's side again if he becomes strong enough, and she tells him that he will have to work really hard and remain unfazed by the challenges along the way, but even then, there's no guarantee. But as Vil leaves, she remarks that it will be fun to see what Vil can accomplish. Back to the present, Vil is currently in Werkner's class as he teaches everyone about the Tower of Magic. Climbing the tower means advancing to the upper institute to the topmost floor, where you will become a Magia Vendor. As of now, there are currently 2 methods to becoming Magia Vendor, and that's either to create a new type of magic or to earn over 7,000 credits in the school, but is pretty rare to invent new magic, so students usually focus on earning credits. However, since this is a remedial class, everyone in here is in danger of flunking out of school, especially Vil. After the classes are over, Colette meets up with Vil and asks how Vil is feeling since Werkner's remedial classes are notoriously strict. Vil agrees that Werkner is a strict teacher, but to be honest, he's glad Werkner is kind enough to offer remedial classes in the first place, since most professors wouldn't bother to do so. As they are turning a corner, the animistic commotion going on, so they listen in and hear Xiaon's friends glazing him for defeating the evil Sentinel. You will question how he survived, but somehow by the time he woke up the only thing Moore saw was Xiaon and a defeated evil Sentinel, meaning Xiaon had to have defeated it. Everyone believes Xiaon is amazing for being able to kill a monster as powerful as an evil Sentinel, but deep down, Xiaon knows he's a fraud since the one who actually defeated it was Vil. Just then he notices Vil walking by and he takes that as a personal insult, so he goes to Vil and starts picking a fight with him again. However, it's a lot harder for him to see Vil as inferior when he knows Vil could easily one-shot him right now. He's just choosing not to. He lets go Vil's jacket and begins walking away without saying a word. So once Xiaon is gone, Colette asks Vil if something happened between the two of them, and something definitely happened. At the same time, Edward has just barged into Headmistress Cauldron's office and is demanding that Vil be expelled immediately. Cauldron asks why Edward suddenly wants to expel Vil out of the blue. He's already in his 6th and final year at the academy, so they can't just expel him without a reason. Edward tries to argue that Vil can't be allowed to stay at this school since he's a warrior not a mage, and he won't stand for someone who can't use magic trying to surpass it. Cauldron pulls out Vil's records and points out that Vil has outstanding scores in his writing and his magic reports are incredibly insightful, so aside from the fact that he can't use magic, he is the definition of a perfect student. If his dream were to become a Magiavander, then he could easily excel at any other profession shows, and it is the Academy's duty to produce people of learning for the fated day. However, Edward states that the fact Vil wants to become a Magiavander is the problem, and Cauldron can see Edward's points, so she proposes a solution. She tells Edward to go and personally test Vil, and Vil cannot pass Edward's test, then he's free to expel him if he wants. Edward asks if Cauldron is sure she wants to leave Vil's tests up to his #1 hater, and Cauldron says she's fine with it since it won't make a difference. If anything, she thinks it will be more entertaining to have the one known as the Dark Viper Mage test Vil. Back on Vil End is getting ready for his next class and asks Colette to help him open his locker for him. She happily does so, and he apologizes for having her do this for him all the time since he can't use magic. She says she doesn't mind, but then she notices real sword in his locker and asks him if he's still training with him. Vil says he is, but he couldn't get permission to use it while he's in school, and back in his dorm, his roommate wouldn't let him do anything dangerous. He and Colette later head to the library to study together, and Vil is taking it very seriously despite having already learned this topic before. Colette tells him to take it easy since he's already at the top of the class in writing, but Vil says he needs to keep studying his hardest since he can't afford to lose a single credit, and besides, he enjoys learning history from the perspectives of the other races. Especially since he can relate to the dwarves. They marched to war against powerful mages, but they never gave up in spite of the challenge. Just then, Colette notices that Vil has a white strand of hair on his head, and she says it's probably because he's overworking himself. She offers to pluck it out for Vil, and even though Vil says she doesn't need to, she still really wants to do it. However, in the middle of their flirting, Edward shows up behind Vil and tells him to come to the spell hall alone, because there is something he needs to do. A little while later, Vil arrives at the spell hall and Edward says that he will be offering Vil a special remedial class, so he should be grateful for it. Vil can't believe Edward would offer him a remedial class, but that still shows that he has no good intentions. He wants to see what Vil can really do, so he fires a warning shot to let Vil know that this is seriously tells him, and if he's able to successfully land a blow, then Edward will award him 5 spell work credits, otherwise if he fails, he will immediately be expelled. He also tells Vil that he's not allowed to refuse this test either, so he begins casting his spells takes Vil out. Meanwhile, Werkner has just been summoned to Cauldron's office, and she apologized for calling him here on such short notice, but she thought Werkner should be informed of what Edward is doing. She casts a spell to show him the test Edward is giving Vil, and she forbids Werkner from interfering for any reason. She believes it's only fair that Edward gets to have this request granted since Werkner got the same when he asked to watch over Vil. Still, Werkner thinks it is too cruel to let Edward of all people be the one to test Vil because he's a man who nearly became a Magiavander. He may have failed, but he still possesses power that is equivalent to one, so Vil is in serious danger right now. So far Vil has been able to avoid getting hit by Edward's spells, but Edward has only been using low-level black magic so far, so Vil can't believe how much power Edward is producing. Vil has to fight back somehow, so he tries to run up behind Edward and landing kick, but Edward is easily able to block it with a shield spell. The shield is too strong for Vil to break it on arms, and Edward calls and hopeless for thinking he could get through a magic shield with a kick. Edward then blasts him away, and Vil is starting to worry that there may be no way for him to win, as Edward is simply too strong for him to beat as he is now. Edward tells Vil that he will limit himself to 2 spells, one to attack with fire and one to defend himself from Vil's crude attacks. However, even if it is only one attack spell, one who has mastered that one spell can outclass someone who has learned 1000. Edward is simultaneously casting his fire spell, and Vil knows it will be bad news for him if he gets hit with that, so he starts running away, but Edward is still able to blast him regardless, and you can tell Edward is enjoying this because he looks like he's conducting a symphony of Vil's screams. Vil eventually falls to the ground, and he realizes there's no way for him to beat Edward like this, but if he had his sword, he could at least hold his ground against Edward. Outside the spell hall, Colette has been putting her things away in her locker, and she is really worried about Vil since Edward asking Vil to come alone for remedial classes couldn't have been a good sign. All of a sudden, Kiki came running up into the room, covered in Vil blood, and she was trying to get the Vil sword in his locker, so Colette realizes that something bad really happened to Vil and opens his locker, so they can go give him his sword. As Vil is lying on the ground, Edward is slowly walking towards him while saying that Vil could never hope to become a Magiavander if he can't surpass him here. Magic has always reigned supreme even in the past. When dwarves went to war with images against an army of 10,000 dwarves, all it took was one mage to annihilate them all. The sword is never going to compare to the wand, but even if the odds are insurmountable, Vil still wants to become a Magiavander, and he will do whatever it takes to achieve it. Edward can't understand why Vil would go to such lengths to become one, so he asks if Vil has some sort of noble goal that he wants to accomplish, so Vil tells him that he wants to be by the side of the girls he loves, but Edward thinks that's a stupid reason. It may seem ridiculous to Edward, but Vil made a promise to Elfaria, and no matter what it takes, he wants to be able to watch the sunset with her. Just then Coletta arrives at the spell hall and throws Vil's sword to him, and now that he's finally armed, Vil is able to counter Edward's fire spell. Edward is shocked that Vil was able to cut through the spell, but he realized this because Vil's sword is special. Even so, he still intends to prove that Vil is no match for a mage. Vil is terrified of Edward's flames, and if possible, he would have run away from this fight a long time ago, but facing Edward is the only way for Vil to move forward, so he charges at Edward while dodging all his attacks, and since he's finally close enough, he slices through Edward's barrier and successfully scratches Edward's cheek. Edward is forced to admit that Vil has passed the test, so he awards him his 5 credits and walks away. Vil collapses to the ground out of exhaustion, and Colette runs up to congratulate him on his victory, but he's totally passed out. Cauldron praises Vil's performance, and Werkner says his strategy of diving into the attack to close the distance and attack from a blind spot was brilliant, and what's even more impressive is that the sword strike was powerful enough to surpass Edward's shield, so Vil may have what it takes to become a Magiavander after all. The story continues. In a flashback, we see the time Elfaria gifted Vil a pair of goggles, and immediately after doing so she had to say goodbye since she was going to the top of the tower. However, as she was walking away, Vil called out to Elfaria and swore to her that he would find a way to climb the tower as well so they can be together, even if the odds are against him and he can't use magic. Vil swears that he will keep his promise and see the sunset with her someday. Elfaria was moved by Vil's speech, so she turned around with tears in her eyes and said she would wait for him as long as it takes, and as Elfaria finally left, Vil vowed that this would be the last time he ever cries or acts pathetic again. Back to the present, Vil is currently busy with his paper deliveries since he's got to work a lot of jobs to pay for his tuition. Well, on his usual route, he happens to run into Donnan and he greets him warmly, wishing Vil luck on his delivery route. He also says he will be visiting the tavern later today, so Vil tells him he will be waiting for him. As Vil runs off to finish off his deliveries, he ends up tripping on some steps and spilling the newspapers all over the place, but that is not a problem since with his speed, he's easily able to pick all the papers out of the air and avoid falling over. He happened to miss on newspaper, so he walks over to pick it up, but as he does so, he notices an article about Elfaria and how she's created yet another type of original magic. She's the first person to create 12 different original magic spells, and Vil is happy to see that she's still working hard up there, so she's going to work hard here as well. He's about to get moving again, but then he notices that there's another section in the article that says Elfaria has personally passed a request to the academy, and he totally freaks out over it. He immediately runs over to his dorm room and begins asking his roommate Rosti if he can help him make a magic item on short notice. Rosti asks what the huge rush is, so Vil tells him about the request Elfaria put in and he wants to be the one to handle it. He doesn't have any lessons today, so he's free to prioritize the requests and starts getting dressed. The job is to gather Frostwalker ice cores since she apparently needs a lot of magic capitalists and all participating students are going to be compensated accordingly, so Vil just needs Rosti's magic items to help him. Rosti jokes that Vil is really straightforward his request, but he has no reason to refuse, so he hands Vil his new improved magic items, which Vil is very thankful for. Down on the 4th floor of the dungeon, Vil has just arrived to begin gathering ice cores, but there are already a ton of students here to do the same thing. Still, Vil expected as much since Elfaria is famous, so he is going to give it his all. However, just as he is about to start, a huge explosion rings out in the cave and it looks like it was caused by Shaun, who just blew up a bunch of Frostwalkers. His friends praise him for his display of skill, but internally, Shaun is agonizing over the fact that he is still nowhere near the level of strength Vil showcased that day. Vil sees Shaun. He is honestly impressed by the magic power he used, although he seems really angry about something. In any case, with all these students here, Vil will never get the chance to play any Frostwalkers of his only choice is to go deeper into the dungeon floor. As Vil descends, he ends up seeing a girl in danger, so he leaps into action and moments later, All 3 monsters have been sliced in half. The girl is shocked by what she just witnessed since this is the first time she's seen a magic student use the sword to fight. Vil asked her if she's alright, and after the initial shock has worn off, she says she's fine and introduces herself as Iris. We cut to a lecture with Werkner where he is talking about the great achievement of creating new magic. It is an accomplishment so grand that it warrants unconditional advancement up to the top of the magic tower, and new magic is usually named after the person who created it, or from words associated with them. For example, the dark magic spell Dax Darbicans that Edward used his name after a maze from ancient times called Fire Watchman Darbicans, so if any one of the students here manages to create new magic, they will be carving their names into history forever. A student raises their hand and asks Werkner if this means Elfaria is an amazing mage, and without a doubt Werkner believes that Elfaria is unbelievably good. Her magecraft is unheard of for a single mage to create 12 original spells by themselves, so in all the annals of his Troy she's one of the greatest mages to ever live. After hearing about Elfaria's accomplishments, Colette has to admit that she's every bit as amazing as Vil said she was, but her friend Rose starts teasing her from being jealous of Elfaria because she's in love with Vil. Colette gets embarrassed and yells at Rose for saying such ridiculous things, but that causes a disturbance in class, so Werkner turns around and tells her to sit down and be quiet. Meanwhile, down in the dungeon, Vil and Iris are walking along a passage, and after Vil had introduced himself to her, she recalls hearing about him since she was told about an upperclassman who couldn't use magic, nicknamed the Unprecedented No Talent. Vil is shocked to hear that people actually call him that, but he also notices that Iris referred to him an upperclassman, so she explains that she's only 14, meaning she's 2 years below Vil right now. That makes her 4th-year student. But Vil has something that he's curious about, so he asks her if she doesn't feel any disdain towards him due to his lax magic, but Iris doesn't see why she should dislike Vil for something like that, especially when he saved her a few minutes ago. Even if he can't use magic, she's a heartful respect for people who have their own special talents. Vil gets a bit flustered, so he changes the subject and asks Iris if she's here because of Elfaria's request, and Iris confirms it, saying she wants to be of use to the Magiavander, and someday she hopes to become one of the people to hold up the sky, and she isn't speaking metaphorically. By the way, in this world, people aren't able to see the real sky because the world is hidden. The tremendous energies of the Magiavander cover everything and create a false sky known as the Great Barrier, and according to the legends, when the Great Barrier falls, the world will once again be enveloped in darkness and a great calamity will begin. That's why students are motivated to fulfill the requests of the Magiavander, not just because they admire them, but also because they believe it will help support their mission to hold the sky up. Iris mentions that she's actually had the honor of meeting Elfaria person before, and Vil is surprised, so she starts telling him how it happened. She was cornered in the dungeon one day, and as her life had begun to flash before her eyes, she saw no way out. However, before she could be devoured, a burger wall of ice encased all the monsters that were attacking her, and she turned around to find Elfaria standing there and asking if she was alright. It was an experience she will never forget, which is why she wants to do everything that she can help Elfaria. However, she knows she can to get the Frostwalker course. She hasn't been able to find a single one, and her search spell isn't picking up anything either, so she assumed that other students must have defeated them all. But Vil doesn't think that's the case. He shows Iris an ice fragment that Frostwalkers leave behind when they move, and it's normally supposed to be around millimeter, but this one is huge. That can only mean that there must be a powerful Frostwalker nearby, probably somewhere that Iris's search spell can't detect. Iris asked Vil how he could possibly know all this when he can't use magic, so he explains that he studies magic because he thinks it is amazing, but it's not almighty, especially down the side of place like the dungeon, so he who lacks magic has to use all his knowledge, wisdom, and experience to make up for it. Iris asks what Vil means by experience, and seeing as they are standing in a large open room, Vil's experience tells him that there is about to be a boss battle. As the Frostwalker tries to seek attack them, Vil dashes forward to get Iris safety, and as she finally realizes what's going on, she identifies the monster as a Frost Rex. A Frost Rex is the highest form of Frostwalker, and it's worth 6 credits on its own, so it's basically the special boss monster of the 4th floor. The Frost Rex fires an ice laser towards them, so Vil jumps out of the way to avoid being frozen to death. He says Iris down and asks her to stay back while he handles the Frost Rex, but Iris warns him that physical attacks won't work against the Rex, as anything it touches will instantly be frozen. For that reason, close combat has been completely ruled out as an option, and it is generally believed that the only way to deal with it is with long-range magic attacks, but Vil isn't worried as he has a plan in mind to deal with the Rex. As it begins charging up another laser blast, Vil prepares the magic item he got from Rosti and charges forward at it. He evades the ice beam and lands behind the Rex before sliding underneath. The Rex can't keep track of Vil, so it begins firing in random directions, and while it's not paying attention, Vil uses the magic item to latch onto its body before dashing around the road to entangle it. Before long he has completely ensnared the Rex in wires, and Vil states that the main weaknesses of Frost Rex are fire magic and explosive attacks. So as the Frost Rex is about to fire another blast at him, Vil activates the magic item and causes the wire to ignite, leave all the way back to the bombs that were attacked to the hook and causing a huge explosion. The Frost Rex is reduced to a pile of rubble, so Vil retracts the tool and makes a mental note to thank Rosti for his help later. Iris is stunned at what she just saw, but then her true personality comes out and she remarks that Vil is far stronger than the rumors had led her to believe. She wonders how she should report her findings, but while she's thinking, Vil gets her attention and tells her they got on really good ice course so they can head back now, and Iris smiles in agreement to maintain her persona and avoid suspicion. A while later, Iris heads to the Wizard Tower, and as she's walking along the halls and taking off her disguise, she goes over what she learned from following Vil. He truly can't use magic, but he compensates for it in creative ways. That, along with his insane battle sense and experience, means that while he's not qualified to be a mage, he is an incredibly talented warrior. As she reaches the end of the hallway, she walks up to a huge door and opens it to meet with the Magiavanders. She asks them for a moment of their time and apologizes if she is interrupting something important, but Cariat tells her that there's no need to apologize since they were just having a boring meeting for the sake of it, but the situation is still dire since if the sky barrier were to be breached now, the world would certainly be destroyed. The celestial host has been watching them from beyond the sky would overwhelm them instantly with the number of mages they have now, so they need to hurry and find more promising mages to aid the fight to come on that fated day, otherwise the calamity and the lore will come to pass, and they can't allow that to happen. They ask Iris have her observation mission when and if she happened to find anyone useful, and she confirms that she managed to find a promising person who could be useful to their cause. The no talent who can't use magic, Vil Serfort, and she recommends that he be inducted into the tower. Cariat and Eleanor are against the idea, but Zio thinks it could be fun, while Elfaria chooses to reserve her opinion on the matter. Zio honestly doesn't care who it is as long as they are useful, but Eleanor thinks it would be crazy to bring a magicless person here. They're about to start a fight over it, but Cariat calms them down and says they don't need to make a decision now as the Grand Magic Festival will be occurring soon, and they can just use those results to decide. The usual ones will naturally end up in the top positions, so Vil doesn't make it that he wasn't cut out for the tower. With that, they called the meeting to a close and all teleport themselves out, and with Elfaria being the only one left, she's happy to know Vil is still trying to keep his promise, so she says she will be waiting for him as long as it takes. The story continues. We see as part of the next test, the students have to participate in. They are all set to fight against golems, and if you manage to defeat one then you pass. Shaun and then Colette are up first, and then both manage to defeat their golems with ease. Meanwhile, Vil is struggling against his. Vil tries running behind the golem, and in order to land clean punch, as the students see him about to attack with his fists, it began mocking him for not being able to use magic, and this distracts Vil long enough for the golem to backhand him across the room. The students begin to leave after being satisfied by Vil's failure to defeat his golem, but on the other end of the room, there are a few students who are having no trouble with the golems at all. They're Lihanna and Wignall, and they both passed without a doubt, but there's one more student who walks up and begins casting ice magic. With the wave of his wand he sends ice cycle shards into all the golems, causing them all to be encased in solid blocks of ice. This is Julius, and he is one of the top 3 students of the academy, along with the other 2. Lihanna commends Wignall and Julius for keeping up with her and not slacking off, but the banquet is going to be starting soon, so there was never a reason for either of them to slack off. On that note, Julius says he would like to declare something war on them, and he will use his newly mastered ultimate technique to deliver their defeat when the time comes. As a token of this sincerity, he offers an ice rose to them, but neither Wignall nor Lihanna seem to be amused, although Wignall does seem to be looking forward to a face-off at Julius. These 3 are pretty much celebrities within the school because they are the only students who all have earned more than 10,000 of the total 12,000 credits. Some people think of credits as a reflection of a mage's capabilities, but Vil is nowhere near that level. Right now he doesn't even have enough credits to graduate in the first place, and this is his final year in this school. As Vil is sitting there and wondering what he's going to do, Julius and his blazers walk up to him and begin insulting him for his lack of magic, and Vil just gets out of his way to avoid causing any problems. As Julius and the others leave, they'll hear them talk about the Grand Magic Festival and have realized it was that time of year already. Later that day during lunch, Colette comes up to Vil and tells him that his only hope of becoming a Magiavander is to get scouted at the Magic Festival. Attempt to graduate based solely on his practice and writing isn't practical, and there have been cases of students getting scouted without having the 7,000 credits needed to graduate. The Magic Festival is a huge event that takes place once every 2 years. It holds several different events and draws in high mages from the tower, hope to scout promising talents. The festival is a place where the different magic factions fight over the right to recruit the best students, and it wouldn't be a stretch to say that admissions from the Upper Institute are decided during the festival. There are 5 factions: the Thunder faction, the All faction, the Fire faction, the Ice faction, and Mysterious Noah. All these factions, excluding Mysterious Noah, are led by the respective Magiavanders, so they scout you to guarantee promotion. Vil doesn't think it's likely that he will be chosen since he's already failing, and for him to even get notice, he would have to have some kind of amazing magic that would put the high mages to shame, and while he's right about that, there are still other ways to get scouted. Colette has heard rumors that Watchers will come to look for talented students, but Vil thinks Watchers are just an urban legend. There's no way a magicless no-towns like him would have a place in the festival, so he's just going to stay behind the scenes and help with the preparations instead. Colette thinks that Vil could change the way people look at him if he entered the festival this year and show them what he can do, but Vil still doesn't want to enter since it would end up becoming an athletics contest if he were there. He's tried entering the festival once before back in his second year, and he literally got booed off stage for using physical attacks. He got bad reputation for that, and he still hasn't gotten over the humiliation of it, so he really doesn't want to enter. Students all over the school have begun practicing in earnest for the festival, and Colette reminds Vil that aside from the high mages, many scouts from the capital will be there as well, so even if Vil can't earn a place as a Magiavander, he could still get scouted for another career. The Magic Festival is a great place to showcase your abilities, so Colette really wants Vil to show everyone how capable he is, but Vil still doesn't think it's a good idea to participate without being able to use magic. Just then, Colette notices something strange, so she was over to one of the other lockers and tells Vil that there's something off about it. It's well hidden, but she could sense a barrier here. Vil asks if she is sure it isn't just a launching well for the locker, but Colette can tell that the barrier is made to block sound and obstruct view. Colette could break it with her magic, but that could be troublesome, so she asked Kiki to do it instead. Once the barrier is dispelled, they find a staircase hidden behind the lockers, which leads to a secret gambling ring. A bunch of students all gather here so they can place bets on who will come out on top the Magic Festival. Colette finds it deplorable that the students would turn their locker room into an illegal gambling ring. Then Vil notices Shaun standing across from them, and he's surprised to see him here, since Shaun doesn't seem like the kind of guy who enjoys betting. Shaun gets defensive and starts yelling at Vil to mind his own business, but Colette steps in and warns Shaun if he gets into a fight with Vil for no reason, then she will make sure he regrets it. Shaun calms down, so Vil asks him again what he's doing here. Since he doesn't seem to be participating in all the betting, Shaun doesn't feel the need to answer Vil questions, but it's totally not like he came here to see whether people are betting on him or not, and he definitely isn't upset that no one thinks he has a chance of winning even though he's the 4th best student in the school. Sure, the top 3 students may have slightly more credits than him, but Shaun's credit scores in the high 9,000s, and the only reason he ranks lower than the others is because he failed a writing test once. Since then, he has been working a lot harder to make up for the lost credits and catch up, but his magic skills are still on par with Lehana and the others, so he is just as likely to win at the festival as any of them are, although he doesn't know why he is trying to justify himself to Vil. After that, the rest of the day goes on like normal, and once classes are over, Vil gets up to leave. Before he goes, Colette gets his attention and asks if he's free after school because she would love to hang out with him, even if it's growing into the dungeon together, but unfortunately Vil has work to do tonight, so he won't be able to spend time with her today. Later that night, Vil is in a Japanese restaurant on the outskirts of the city, and he's working as a waiter there. He brings a tray of food and drinks to Donnan, and Donnan feels bad for how hard Vil has to work all the time. He delivers newspapers in the morning, has classes during the day, and then has to work here at night. It's definitely hard, but Vil has to push through it since he doesn't qualify for the school scholarship, meaning he has to pay for everything out of pocket. Donnan mentions that he heard something about the Grand Magic Festival coming up soon, so he suggests that Vil could participate, but Vil immediately shoots down the idea because he doesn't want to get humiliated again. Gina yells for Vil to get back to work and points out that his friend is working much harder than him. We then see Rosti. He is also working as a waiter here, although he is only doing it for Vil as a favor to him since tonight is really busy, and one of Gina's workers quit and all that extra work is just going to get dumped on Vil's shoulders if she doesn't hire someone soon. After the dinner rush is over, Vil and Rosti are cleaning up the dishes and Rosti asks Vil if he's really okay working here because the wages he gets paid from the dwarves aren't that high. He could easily ask Werkner to help them find a higher paying job, but Vil doesn't want to bother Werkner too much, and decides he likes the people here a lot, so working around is fun for him. They are honest, caring and shower him with warmth, so Vil respects them a lot. Things are going really well, but a few moments later is all ruined as Julius walks into the restaurant just so he can be a hater. As soon as he steps in, the first thing he does is start insulting the restaurant and the dwarves in it. Julius then notices Vil here and begins laughing to himself, and a failure like Vil is only fit to be around barbarians like dwarves. This gets Don in his nerves, but the other dwarves that hold them back because they can't afford to get into a fight the mage. Julius begins threatening Donna not to try anything funny because he and all the other dwarves are just immigrants who fled here after the Celestials destroyed their world, and humans have been graciously allow his kind lives here without issue, so dwarves like him has no right to glare at Julius like that. Donnan calms himself down because he knows there is nothing he can do. Everything Julius said about the dwarves being refugees is true since they fled here after their world was destroyed, but even though the same thing happened with the elves, but dwarves are treated with contempt by the humans here, so if Donnan were to attack Julius for what he said, all dwarves in the city would suffer consequence for it. That's just the way the world works here, but Vil can't stand for such injustice. He decides that today is going to be his last day working here. And since he is no longer employed at this establishment, Vil is free to do whatever the hell he wants without Gina having to face any consequences, and the first thing he does is go to Julius's table and tell him to take back what he just said about the dwarves. Dwarves are hard workers who made the best out of the harsh conditions they were given and thrived, so Julius has no right to call them barbarians. However, Julius couldn't care less about the dwarves or their struggles, so he kicks his plate of food at Vil and his two groupies get up ready to beat Vil up. However, they fail to realize that a plate of food being thrown in one counts as assault, so anything Vil does from herein can be classified as self-defense, and Vil immediately grabs the two boys by the shirt and gives them first-hand knowledge of what the four tastes like. Julius gets slashed in the process, and it's been a long time since he has suffered such humiliation, so he's going to make Vil pay for what he has done. The room begins to freeze over as Julius takes out his wand and begins to attack Vil. Vil jumps back to invade Julius's ice strikes, but he doesn't have his sword and is in an enclosed space, so eventually, Julius manages to trap him with ice and pin Vil to the wall. He then walks up to him and is about to freeze Vil's solids, so Rosti is about ready to step in and save Vil, but before he freezes Vil he looks into those eyes hoping to see him beg for his life, but Vil's eyes showed no sign of fear, so Julius decides on a change of plans. Instead of freezing Vil here, he wants to do it at the Magic Festival so he can fully humiliate Vil in front of the whole school. Vil agrees to fight Julius in the Magic Festival, and Julius says that if he wins he will have Vil kicked out of the school once and for all, but Vil just wants an apology from Julius to all the drawers he disrespected when he wins. The story continues. We see at the day of the Grand Magic Festival, and it's clear that everyone is excited to see what the students can do. The Fire Faction Scout tells his people to be on the lookout for a talented student since you can never tell who possesses the skill to become a Magiavander. The first event involves the broadcasted dragon races, and Lihanna has been maintaining a strong lead over the other competitors for a while now, but that's not the only competition going on right now. As the spectators in the crowd are all eagerly watching to see the results, there are a fair number of recruiters here as well, both from the tower and outsides, and they are all interested in recruiting the best students the school has to offer. Lihanna unsurprisingly wins the dragon race in record time, so the next event is going to be Crown Attack, and it looks like Shaun is going to be participating. He is in a good mood since Colette personally came to ask for him to join her team. She must have finally realized how exceptional Shaun is and wants to work alongside him instead of Will, but as he opens the door to the training room, he is shocked to find Will there as well. Colette clarifies that she was inviting him to join a team with her and Will, because Will needs a team with a total number of credits equal to 21,000 in order to compete in the Crown Attack, and since his credits are so low, the only person should be asked to fill up the final spot with Shaun. Will apologizes for getting Xiaon dragged into his problems, but Xiaon sees no reason why he should help Will. In the first place, why would Will suddenly want to enter an upper-level event like Crown Attack? But while Xiaon is yelling at Will locks eyes with Julius, and Xiaon realizes that Julius is the only one Will is focusing on. Colette explains that something happened between Julius and Will suddenly decided that he would participate in the Crown Attack event no matter what it takes. Xiaon is enraged that Will is ignoring him because he still hasn't gotten over how inferior he felt when Will saved him in the dungeon. As the next event is about to begin, the commentator Mike introduces himself, and as his co-commentator Edward is there as well, although Mike doesn't like it since Edward is the most hated professor in the school due to how strict and scary he is. In fact, he's scared Edward might kill him before the end of the festival, but the show must go on, so Mike announces the main event of the day, the Crown Attack event. A spell is cast over the stadium into a whole battle map. There is a volcano zone, a marshland zone, a badlands zone, and a grassland zone, and a woodland zone. Unlike the other events, the Crown Attack is a team competition held between 3-man cells. All the teams will start on the outer edge of the field and make their way here to the central stadium. At the center of the stadium, there's a giant crown, and the first team to take it will win, but of course that is easier said than done since the entire playing field has been rigged with traps of all kinds. Going for the shortest path to the stadium is allowed, and obstructing other teams allowed as well, so all the events this is sure to be the most brutal battle royale. Edward adds that the event was created to be a practical demonstration of how teams would handle a dungeon raid together, but no one's focusing on team coordination. They all want to see high-level battles between the top students of the school, and if there were an illegal gambling ring in the school, which is there totally isn't. Wignall team is the most popular all the teams, and unsurprisingly, on the opposite end of the gambling pool, the team that has the least popularity is the one led by Will. The students begin laughing at Will for daring to think that he could participate in an event like the Crown Attack, but Will isn't going to lose confidence this time. As the participants for the event are all heading to their designated start locations, Werkner is shocked when he sees that Will intends to compete as well. He tries talking Will out of it, but Will's mind has already made up from the start, so nothing Werkner says can stop him. He apologizes for not listening to Werkner, but even if it makes him the laughingstock in the school, this is one competition and he wants to win by all means. Will then walks away, and Werkner accepts that he isn't going to be able to talk Will out of this, but he reminds Will that he was warned about the risk involved, so if things turn out badly for him, he has no one to blame but himself. With all the students in position, the Crime Attack event can officially begin. The students rush forward, and Julius's team is the first to run into some of the traps that were laid out on the battlefield. As they approach, the cubes engage and form an army of golems which stand in Julie's way. With so many golems in one place, this would easily become an insurmountable roadblock for many students. However, Will continues to charge forward at full speed, and he's showing no signs of slowing down. The students begin to mock him for attempting to break through the golem swarm when he can't use magic and couldn't be a single golem during a praxis exercise. Will continues running towards the golems, and before he attacks he gives a signal to Colette, who then casts a spell to create a magic gauntlet for Will, and with it Will is able to absolutely demolish all the golems in his path. The jaws of all the spectators hit the floor as they all witnessed Will's capabilities, but Werkner already expected something like this to happen. So long as Will attacks using a magic goblet, then he can do a significant amount of damage even if he doesn't have his sword, and since Colette is the one who made it, then it's technically not against the rules either. Against every prediction and all the illegal betting odds, the first one to successfully make it through the golem horde is Will is going straight for the crown now. Ever since the day Will saved him, Xiaon has been reliving that moment over and over in his head. He views it as one of his worst failures, and he would have preferred to die rather than face such terrible humiliation. That's why he has been struggling so hard to improve himself and build up every ounce of strength his body can possibly generate, but even with all his hard work, Will is still outclassing him without magic. In the Crown Attack, Will and his team have taken a huge lead, and with the goal being to reach the stadium and seize the crown, the other competitors are going to have to pick up the pace if they don't want to be left behind. Will makes it to the Badlands zone, and upon arrival more cute traps activate. By this time they begin fire and rock bullets at Will and the others. As the bullets are headed their way, Will stops and uses his gauntlet to punch the ground to create a rock wall that blocks the bullets. He then jumps forward and asks Colette for some help again, so she casts a spell that creates a dozen swords for Will, and he proceeds to use the swords as projectiles to destroy all the cubes in his way. Mike announces that Will team has made it through the Badlands with ease, and they're yet to come across a trap that poses a challenge for them with their teamwork. although Shaun hasn't really done anything though. The spectators that get against Will try to downplay his skill by saying Colette's magic is doing all the heavy lifting and her magic definitely plays a part in it, but the efficiency of the weapons in battle all comes down to Will's technique. The scouts are starting to take notice of Will and his amazing skill in detecting and countering traps, and as much as he doesn't like Will, even Edward has to acknowledge his hard work. All the time Will is spent in the dungeons has allowed him to minimize the inefficiencies in his movements, and his superhuman reflexes allow him to capitalize on the smallest openings available. One other team is frustrated that they are losing to someone who has no magic, but their hate for Will distracts them so much that they end up falling for Flower Trapped, so they get eaten alive, and another teams face similar issues with the traps laid along the path, but through all the brutal obstacles, Will still manages to keep the lead with his team. The turn of events has caused quite the uproar of the stadium, so much so that Julius can hear it all the way over here. He asked his teammates for an update on the current situation of the event, and Julius's teammates uses Detect Spell to locate the rest of the competition. From what they are seeing, it looks like Will is currently in the lead by a large margin, so if they don't do something about him soon, Julius may actually lose. However, Julius doesn't seem to be all that worried since he has a plan to handle Will personally. Meanwhile, Will and the others have just made it to the final area before the arena Enchanted Woods. As Will runs in first, he triggers several magic circles at once, and he soon realizes that this must be a chain circle trap, but it's not going to be a problem since he already has the perfect counter for something like this. If all of them are going to fire at once, then he's just going to have to make them cancel each other out, so he begins carving away the area around each magic circle, and by putting some spin on them, he is able to make all the spells fire at one another and explode. Mike excitedly announces that Will has made it through the forest traps without any trouble, and he asked Edward if he has any comments to make since he was the one who set up that dark magic minefield, but Edward just clicks his tongue in annoyance that Will managed to get past his traps so easily, even with all the momentum Will has built up with his massive lead as he gets closer to the stadium. The chances of him running into another team and getting attacked rise dramatically. He's had to take out a couple of other teams, but there's one team in particular that he is after, so Will intends to run ahead and set up an ambush for Julius. However, as he is on his way to secure the high ground for his ambush, the tables are turned on him as Julius fires an icicle straight at him. Will is alright since it didn't hit his body directly, but he can't understand how Julius could have possibly made it here before after the huge lead they had. On top of that, Julius is alone, so Will has to worry about the possibility that Julius's other teammates are hiding somewhere and ambush him. Julius begins to cast a hail of icicles at Will, but Will doesn't have time to worry about the possibility of an ambush and starts running away for now. He just needs to get serious and deal with Julius, but it looks like Shaun is getting serious as well as he begins the casting process for an unbelievably powerful inferno, but he seems to be staring at Will a little too much, so Colette warns Will that Shaun might be aiming for him. As Shaun fires the spell, Colette creates a rock wall in front of Will. In order to keep him from getting burnt to ash, Shaun's blast creates a massive shockwave throughout the battlefield, and Will is a little confused about what just happened. He looks up and sees that the forest has been completely incinerated, and Shaun walks up to Will, saying Julius was in the way. He may have taken Julius out as well, but there's no doubt in Colette's mind that soon fire that spell with the intention of killing Will. Colette asks what he thinks he is doing, but Shaun believes he is justified in his actions. He played along with Colette's request and joined their team so that Will could participate in this event, so now he wants to favor payback by having a one-on-one fight with Will. Will asks why Shaun wants to fight all of a sudden, and why it has to be now of all times, but Shaun doesn't feel like explaining himself and fires a warning shot at Will. Colette tries to interfere and stop him, but before she can do so she is blocked by a wall of ice from Julius. He somehow managed to survive that deadly blast. Colette is in trouble, so Will wants to go save her, but Shaun isn't going to let Will go until he has gotten a proper fight out of him, so he shoots some fireballs at Will which knock his sword out of his hand. Will tries to reason with Shaun so they can do this another time, but she and his dad said on Friday him, so he tells Will to pick up his sword so they can have a duel, and with no other options Will agrees to face him. To Shaun, Will looked pitiful from the very first day he laid eyes on him, but at the time Shaun felt genuine sympathy for Will and all the bullying he was suffering, and he really wanted to help him, so he tried to convince Will to become his subordinate because that way no one would be able to bully him anymore. However, Will completely ignored him and kept walking around the corner. Shaun runs to catch up to him, but as he grabbed Will and told him to take the offer seriously, Will looks him dead in the eyes and tells Shaun to get out of his way. Shaun may have pitted at Will, but Will never pitted himself for a minute. Rather, he was always looking forward to his goal, and Xiaon couldn't accept the fact that Will had rejected his kindness and ignored him as though he were a side character, so from that day forward, Xiaon started to hate Will. Back to the present, Will is running amongst the trees in an attempt to evade Xiaon's fireballs, but as he hides behind the tree, Xiaon sends some homing fireballs which nearly hit Will and send him flying across the forest floor. B catches himself with his sword, but Xiaon sends another flame attack in his direction, so Will is forced to use the sword to deflect it. And while he's distracted, Xiaon catches him off guard with a fire whip which swings him around the forest, while eventually manages to cut himself free, but Xiaon is right there to attack him with a devastating explosion spell. Luckily, Will diplexers well, but it's starting to get on Xiaon's nerves that Will is doing nothing but evading when they are meant to be having an all-out fight. Will responds by saying he doesn't want to have to fight with Xiaon here. The only reason he joined this competition in the first place was to get justice for Danan and the other dwarves, so he doesn't have time to waste on a pointless fight with Xiaon right now. Xiaon is enraged that Will still isn't taking him seriously even situation like this, so he threatens to burn Will to ash if he doesn't start treating this like a serious fight. The crowd is shocked to see Xiaon fighting Will when they are supposed to be on the same team, since something like this has never happened before. Mike asks Edward for his opinion on the matter, and Edward says it's disgraceful for students in the same team to be fighting amongst themselves, and given that the objective of the competition is teamwork, Will's team is sure to lose points with the scouts, but at the same time he seems really pleased that Xiaon is messing up Will's chances of winning this event. Everyone in the crowd is shocked that Xiaon would be short-sighted enough to attack his own teammate because of a personal grudge, and the scouts are definitely taking note of this behavior pattern. Rosti is worried about Will's safety, but he also can't help but feel intrigued to find out what's going to happen next anyway. As he is watching the anticipation, Iris approaches him and asks if she can sit next to him. Rosti seems to recognize her, so he says he's fine with her sitting next to him. So Iris takes a seat and immediately begins cheering for Will. Rosti is surprised she would go out of her way to support Will since she always looked like a mean person him, and Iris admits that this out of character for her, but after she was introduced to Weil, she couldn't help but feel captivated by him. Rosti can understand the feeling, but he's starting to get jealous that Will is so popular with the ladies and even Xiaon as well, since he is technically fighting because Will never gave him any attention. Naturally, Rosti loves Will most out of anyone since he is Will's roommate, like he could say the same about Colette since she has always been by Will's side no matter what. Even now that she's being attacked by Julius, the only thing on her mind is how she can get Xiaon to stop fighting Will so he doesn't lose this competition. However, she won't be able to do anything about Xiaon and Will's fight while Julius is here. Julius mocks Colette for running away from him this entire time when she's known as the Earth Princess for her skills, but Colette never liked that title, so she threatens to make him regret it if he calls her Earth Princess again. Surely, he sends more icicles after Colette, so Colette uses earth magic to create a wall in front of herself and stop the ice. However, Julius wasn't aiming at her alone, as one of the icicles hits the ground and activates one of Edward's traps, so before she can react she is caught in a massive energy blast. While that is going on, the spectators begin noticing something off about Julius, and it's the fact that he is on every screen at the same time. Somehow Julius is fighting every student involved in this competition at the same time, but the method he is using remains an absolute mystery. Julius also challenges Wignall's team, and Wignall is fine with the added challenge of facing Julius, but before they begin, he says he wants to return the ice flower that Julius gave him. With a wave of his wand, Wignall makes Julie's ice flower appear in the sky, and this distracts Julius long enough for Wignall to create a magic circle beneath his feet and obliterate Julius in an instant. While the others are confused, Wignall recognizes that this is what Julius meant when he said he would win with his trump card, and he has to admit, a Magia Vander level spells is quite impressive. Mike isn't sure what exactly happened there, but Wignall has just defeated Julius, who suddenly appeared right in front of him, and coincidentally Mike bet all his money on Wignall, so he's really hyped to see him performing well. Meanwhile, from above the stadium, two elf girls from the elf faction are watching the festival. Lafia asks Philvis what she thinks of the students at the academy, and the only thing Philvis can say is that they're doing about as well as she had expected them to do. The general opinion regarding the competition is that either Julius or Wignall is going to win, and that Will might have had a chance if only Xiaon hadn't done this, but his friends know that this is way out of character for him, so they are wondering what could have made him act so rashly. Lyril thinks he can understand why Xian is doing all this, and it's not that he's trying to get Will expelled because he hates him, he just wants to prove something. We cut back to Will and Xian's fight, and Will can't understand what he's done to deserve this much hate from Xian. Ever since he enrolled in this school, he has never done anything wrong, that he was relentlessly bullied by his peers for his lack of magic. He must aware that he was a flunky, so he never asked for recognition nor tried to be selfish, but people kept messing with him, which is why Xian tried to help him. Will misunderstood it as another act of bullying and walked away. Back to the present, Will dodges another one of Xian's fireballs, but the next attack Shannon has prepared won't be so easy to dodge. He summons a fire-hot guardian, and Will is shocked because summoning the guardian is really high-level magic. Xian sends the guardian to attack Will, and Will needs to think quickly to avoid getting burned, so he sticks his sword in the ground and leaps over the bird to slice off one of its wings, and immediately after he begins charging towards Xian to attack him. However, the guardian regenerates its wings in an instant ambience, charging at Will from behind, so Will now has his attention divided between handling Xian, who is attacking from the front, and defending against the guardian from behind. He makes its split-second decision, jumping out of the way of the guardian's attack and moving to sword to his other hand, so he can block Xian's attack, but Will is still struggling to hold his ground against Xian's flames. He eventually deflects the fireball, has left both him and Xian winded. Back at the stadium, Edward is in shock at the level of skill Xian just displayed, because it is far above the level a student should be capable of. Not only was he able to use such a powerful fire spell at the start of the fight, but he can also flawlessly summon a guardian to aid him in battle. The scouts had realized that Xian possessed such precise control over his magic, and it didn't line up with the reports they received about him, since all of his records saying that he was a decent magic student, but not outstanding as to be labeled as one of the school's top talents. However, something must have happened recently to make him improve this much. They'll need to prepare a new report for Cariat, since it looks like they found their latest scouting candidate. Will also realizes that Xian has gotten a lot stronger than he used to be, but begins to yell at Will because he knows Will is still holding back against him. He wants Will to use the strength he showed when he was up against the evil Sentinel, but the situation was different back then. It's one thing to go a lot to kill a monster, but Will sees no reason why he should be fighting Xian right now. Xian can't believe that after all the years of hitting on Will and humiliating him, any chance he could get that Will still doesn't resent him? However, Will never said he doesn't resent Xian. He can't even count the number of times they thought about getting revenge for all the things Xian has done to him, but now isn't the time for that, because he needs to focus on defeating Julius instead. Hearing those words come out of Will's mouth makes Xian incredibly angry, because even now Will is still ignoring him. He doesn't care about Will's problems or whatever goals he wants to accomplish. He just wants Will to look at him and face him like a worthy rival rather than some insignificant obstacle. While Will never tried to act in his selfish manner, he still always has a part of him wishing that someone would recognize his skill, but he didn't think it would ever happen. He never knew she had thought so highly of him, but now that he does, if Xian truly wants Will to acknowledge him as an opponent, and Will has no choice but to face him seriously. Xian is happy to see that Will is finally taking him seriously, so he begins casting another spell. Will realizes that if he tries to attack now, then the Guardian is sure to intercept him, so he decides to wait for the moment when Xian casts his spell to counter-attack. As Xian finishes his spell incantation, he orders his Guardian to attack while he simultaneously casts a wide-range annihilation spell. This simultaneous attack would normally be unavoidable. However, Will already saw the trajectories of all the fireballs, so he dashes forward and skillfully runs in between the gaps and the attacks. He then leaps into the air and destroys the core of the Guardian, and with no more obstacles in his way, he charges straight for Xian to take him out. Xian expects it as much from Will, but he isn't out of defensive measures yet, as he casts a last-minute fireball at Will. However, before the two could clash, Colette created a giant rock wall in between them. Both Will and Xian weren't expecting this, and they fall to the ground, and as they look over, they see smoking mad Colette, who has had most of her clothes burned off. Will asks Colette what happened to Julius, so she answers that she bit into poop, but then he turned into ice and disappeared. Xian is confused where she says Julius disappeared, but then he realizes something even more shocking. Colette's clothes are almost entirely burned off. He tells her she's showing way too much skin for a noble lady, but she reminds Xian that it was his flames that did this to her clothes in the first place. She then tells Will and should go on ahead without them, since he needs to catch up to Julius before he captures the crown. Xian tries to argue that he hasn't finished his duel with Will yet, but she shuts him down and says it is really important that Will beats Julius here, and this was pretty much his only chance to show the tower how capable he truly is, but Xian had to go and ruin it. Will stops her and thanks her for being worried about him, but he can still make it in time. He apologizes to Xian and tells him they can complete their duel another time, but Xian still wanted to settle a fight today. Back at the stadium, the first team to arrive is Julius's team and it looks like nothing can stop them now, but right outside the stadium Will is running in at full speed, and just before Julius's team can claim the crown, he crash lands in the middle of the arena and tells Julius that it's time to settle this. Up the wizard tower, Elfaria seems to be enjoying the peaceful day, but she's really just fast asleep. Sarisa the maid witches tells Elfaria would take her job as Magia Vander more seriously because she's always just staring at the world below. Sarisa has her look over the potential candidates that the scouts are recommending, and she points out one that they consider to be the Ice faction's best candidate. It's Julius, and he's causing quite a stir at the festival. Sarisa even thinks that he might become Elfaria's successor. Elfaria takes a look at the report and agrees that he could become her successor if everything stays the way it is. Back at the festival, the match reaches its climax as someone just needs to grab the crown. Julius is glad that Will was able to make it to the end because he wouldn't have been satisfied if he won without humiliating him first. Will tells him not to worry because until Julius apologizes for the dwarves, he has no intentions of backing down. Julius called Will a mouse that he's going to toy with, and he covers the arena in a cold mist. Will assumed that Julius is using the smokescreen to attack, but he quickly realizes that Julius and his team have surrounded him. They begin attacking, so Will decides that he has to keep moving so he doesn't get hit. He plans to judge their locations using their attacks, so he waits for them all to fire at him. Will determine where all three of them are, so he goes to attack one, but he's surprised by a fourth shot. Julius taunts him by calling him a laggard and Will is stunned when Julius reveals that he and his buddies never even moved. The entire stadium is then just as shocked when they see that 4 other Juliuses have appeared. As if that weren't bad enough, Julius reveals that his clones also explode. He makes one of them blow up, encasing Will in ice. Edward has a terrified look on his face, as there's no mistaking that Julius is using a certain type of magic. Werkner is horrified as well because Julius is using the secret arts discovered by the genius and unrivaled Elfaria. Elfaria created 12 spells and Julius has somehow learned how to use one of them. This spell creates copies of its user and will demand to know how Julius is able to use Elfaria's magic. Julius laughs like an absolute psychopath and reveals that his talent is simply what allows him to do it. He learned the secret art just by studying it on his own. Julius says that Elfaria isn't so impressive after all, and he declared that soon he will expose her for all to see. Of course, Will is infuriated to hear his girl talked about this way, so he shatters Julius's eyes and charges 8 at him. Will finds himself in a pretty tough spot though, as Julius's clones move exactly as he wishes, and they can even use magic. Will is startled when they all stop attacking and they form a cage around him. Will can't break free, so Julius taunts him and summons a giant ball of ice. He declares that this is the end and he crushes Will. The entire crowd is in awe of his immense power, and Edward points out that Julius was able to win the fight without even taking a single step. This is ideal for a mage, and it's clear now why Julius was able to obtain thousands of credits. Julius uses this moment to speak to the scouts, and he points out how impossible it is for him to be defeated after learning one of Elfaria's secret arts. Julius says that he will prove to them that he deserves to be Elfaria's successor, and the crowd erupts with cheer. Iris determines that Julius was just putting on a show for this scout, and he just used Will, who's as quick and agile as a monster. Iris knows better as she says that it's not over, and Rosti says that Julius would look like a real fool if he doesn't win after doing so much showboating. They both seem to know something, but everyone else is shocked when Will shatters Julius's giant boulder of ice. Will thanks Julius for helping him cool off because he always gets hot-headed when it comes to Elfaria. Julius is determined to humiliate Will, so he attacks again, but Will easily dodges this time. As he takes out Julius's friends, Will explains that Julius hasn't perfected Elfaria's spell. The crowd is stunned and Edward realizes that Will just hit himself to get an advantage, the same as when they fought. The crowd becomes confused when Julius's clones start falling apart, and Will reveals that Julius was only able to control his clones with the help of his friends. This means that Julius can only use Elfaria's magic briefly. Will says that he has no right to be Elfaria's successor, and Julius becomes enraged. We look back at Elfaria after she agreed with Maid Sama about Julius being her successor. However, she says that it isn't a successor that she longs for, instead what she wants is a lone sword by her side. Vuil explains that while Guardians left on their own, the clones Julius was using must actively be controlled. Because of this, Julius had to rely on his friends, and it's clear that he's just a phony. The enraged Julius calls Vuil a no-talent as he attacks, but Vuil shows that he can easily defend himself. Julius is determined to prove Vuil wrong, so he once again uses Elfaria's magic. Vuil expertly dodges all the attacks coming from the clones, and Julius thinks about how he can control 4 clones at a time, but without his friends he's reduced to holding a defensive position. Julius is still confident that he could win though, because there's no way for Vuil to know which Julius is the real one. Of course, the fool is stunned when Vuil finds him, and blasts right through his ice wall to land an attack. Vuil explains to the startled Julius that the internal temperature of his ice clones made him easy to find. If the clones aren't controlled perfectly, the cold leaks out and ice crystals even begin to form at their feet. Julius begins to really lose his cool now, as he loses the rest of his clones, and he demands to know why Vuil knows the spell better than he does. Vuil's answer is simple: he handled Elfara, his childhood friends. They were raised in the same orphanage, so he knows her magic very well. He admired it and studied it, but he could never catch up to her. This is why he knows all the strength and weaknesses of Elfaria's magic. Julius calls Vuil a no-talent one last time before he attacks, but Vuil is in complete control now. Vuil compliments Julius because up till now no one has been able to replicate Elfaria's magic. However, he makes it clear that Julius is nowhere near her level. This is because the clone spell that Julius can barely even use properly was invented by Elfaria when she was only 2 years old. Vuil exposes him for being a fraud, and Julius thinks about how excited he was when he learned the spell. Reality begins to sadden though, and he realizes that he was only on the same level as Elfaria was when she was a toddler. Julius has completely lost it now, as he laughs like a psychopath and he uses his rage to create 8 clones at once. The crowd is amazed, and Julius says that he's not one to be underestimated. He has abandoned any hopes of having full control of the clones, and he plans to simply use sheer numbers to pound Vuil into the ground. Julius is sure that he will win now, but he just gets more infuriated when Vuil says that he used to battle against 10 Elfayas when they were kids. Julius begins his barrage of attacks, but Vuil calmly starts taking out each clone one by one. Julius keeps trying to get away, but things aren't looking so good for him as Vuil masterfully makes his way across the battlefield. Vuil launches his sword to finish off the last clone, and he uses a powerful punch to absolutely destroy the real Julius. The crowd goes absolutely wild as Mike points out that the no-talent Vuil has somehow defeated an elite with over 10,000 credits. Vuil's friends celebrate and Colette rushes to him. There is no one left to stand in his way, and all Vuil has to do now is grab the crown. However, just then Vuil is shocked that Wignall takes the crown first, and he says that he took his time while Vuil and Julius fought. This is just another swing of events in the chaotic match, but it's over now and Wignall is announced the winner of Crown Attack. Up to tower, Maid Sama tells Elfaria that the match is over. Elfaria is completely distracted though and asks if there's a spell that allows someone to change the past. There isn't, so she wonders if there is one to erase a person's memory. Maid Sama wonders what this is all about, and she's shocked to see the condition Elfaria is in. Elfaria was horrified to hear Vuil talk about how she used to beat him up in the past, and she explains that she was just trying to keep Vuil out to herself. Back at the arena, the angry Sion keeps being angry as he can't believe that Vuil even managed to defeat Julius. Colette rushes to Vuil and Sion vows to be the one to defeat him. Vuil apologizes to Colette for letting Wignall take the crown, but she is okay, and Vuil is just glad that he was able to keep his promise to the dwarves. The story continues. We see Vuil may not have won the event, but what's important here is that Julius took an outstanding L, so it's still a victory for Vuil, and all his friends gather at the bar, have a celebratory dinner. Later on in the night, Donnan asks if Vuil ended up getting scouted by a tower, but Colette says he didn't, and it was expected since not only did Vuil's team have an internal battle, but he also didn't actually win the event. Colette blamed Shaun for this, since Vuil could have won easily if he wasn't delayed by Shaun's tantrum during the event. Rosti asks where Shaun is right now, so Vuil explains that he did try to invite Shaun, but Shaun didn't look like he wanted to come. Donnan says it's fine even if he didn't get scouted because he won his fight with Julius and got him to apologize. Speaking of Julius, he is currently in the back washing dishes as part of his apology to the dwarves. He hates having to do this, but he lost of Will, so he has to keep his promise since he's a man of his word, even if it means working here for a while. Everyone other than Julius is having a good time, and Colette notices that Werner seems to be worried about something. She asked him if he isn't enjoying the party, but that's not the problem. He didn't stop Will from entering the event because he saw how motivated Will was to win, but now that he has shown the entire school what he's capable of, Werner is worried about how Will be treated from here on out. Colette had thought people would just treat Will better since they now know how powerful he is, but Werner says it's never that simple. The next day at school, students have started getting ready for the all-student practice event, which entails a full week of dungeon diving. A lot of the students are worried about it and haven't decided on their parties yet, so as Will is walking down the halls with Colette, he is approached by a couple of his classmates, and they nervously asked him if he will join their team for the dungeon raid. They saw how powerful he is, so they would like his help. However, before Will could respond, another set of students walk up and say they want Will on their team as well. More and more students begin arguing over who gets to team up with Will, and Colette now realizes that this is what Werner meant when he said people would treat Will differently. Now that they know he's not a weakling, they all suddenly want to be friends with him, and she thinks that's really hypocritical. She gets in front of Will and yells at the other students for having the audacity to try to befriend Will now after all the bullying they put him through. She is sure Will must be angry about it as well, but on the contrary, Will has never had people act so friendly towards him, so he's just really happy that people actually like him now. Since Will doesn't seem to be mad about the bullying anymore, one of the girls tells Colette to stay out of this and let Will decide who he wants to go with. But just as she tries to convince Will to join her team, Colette smacks the girl's hand away and says she already has plans to go shopping with Will tomorrow. She said it in the spur of the moment, but later that night Colette is cringing at the fact that she accidentally asked Will out on a date. Her roommate comes into the room and teases Colette about having a date with Will tomorrow, but Colette screams that she didn't mean for it to be a date. Rose doesn't argue with her about it, but Colette is still going to go shopping with Will, so should at least prepares herself for it. Colette agrees and says she should at least put a good amount of effort, otherwise she would be rude to Will. Meanwhile, in Will's room Will is currently up doing a bit of study, and Rusty decides to ask about Will's plans for tomorrow. There aren't any classes scheduled, so he asks if Will be going into the dungeon again, but Will informs him that he actually has a shopping date planned with Colette tomorrow. She persuaded him to go, since he had to get his supplies ready for the all-student practice event anyway. Will doesn't think it's that big of a deal, but Rusty is clearly very jealous. The next day, Colette is sitting in the city square and nervously waiting for Will to arrive. Even if she asked him out unintentionally, she's going to do everything in her power to make sure this becomes a real date. Soon after Will arrives and says hello, he compliments Colette on her new dress and hairstyle, saying she looks really pretty, and this makes Colette a bit embarrassed. But before they can head off on their date, Rusty comes running. Colette has no idea why he's here, so Will explains that Rusty was really insistent on tagging along for the shopping trip no matter what, so Will decided to let him come. Rusty says it'll be much more fun with him around, but he just doesn't want Will to be alone with Colette. He goes up to Will and grabs his hand so they can start the shopping trip, but Colette is starting to question the relationship Rusty has with Will. Once they start holding hands like this, and Rusty seems like he's trying to steal Will from her, but it's still not gay because they are wearing socks. Throughout the entire day, every time Colette tries to spend some time with Will, Rusty always gets in the way, so much so by the time the date is almost over, she hasn't gotten a single moment with him. While Rusty is gone, she asked Will what's up with his relationship with Rusty because the two of them are way too close to be regular roommates. She accuses Rusty of secretly being a girl since he has such a pretty face, but Will says they can't be possible because the two of them take baths together, and Rusty has more length and girth than Will does. Sure, Rusty may be a little handsy, but he always says no homo, so it's probably just his way of being friendly. Rusty soon returns with 2 drinks and hands one to Colette and Will, but Will notices that Rusty didn't get one for himself. However, Rusty says it's alright since he can just share Will's drink instead. Colette has had enough of Rusty's antics and stops him by saying he can have her drink instead, but this gets on Rusty's nerves, so he gives Colette the side eye and tells Will to go to the rest of his errands without them. Will argues a bit, but eventually he agrees to go on without them, and as soon as he's gone, Colette directly asks Rusty if he is really just Will's roommate because to her it looks like he's way too affectionate. Rosti gets up and walks in front of Colette to assert his dominance, as he tells her that he loves Will more than anyone, so he's not going to let her try to take him. Colette tries to assert that she's close to Will as well, since they used to hug each other all the time up until 4 years ago, although it embarrasses her to think about it now. Rosti doesn't think it's that much of a big deal since he takes a bath with Will every night, so he is way more intimate with Will than she is. While they are arguing over who has more of a right to spend time with Will, Will is on his way to the blacksmith shop down an alleyway. However, as he is walking, he hears someone call his name and turns around to find Lihanna standing behind him. Will is surprised to see her here since he never thought someone as renowned as the #1 student would have business with him. He asked her if she needs something, so she tells him that she has something she would like to discuss with him. She says it won't take long, so she asks of Will to follow her for a bit. And after some walking, Will is led to a room with Julius, Wignall, and Shaun. Lihanna then addresses everyone and tells them that the reason she has called them all together is because this is the final term of their last year, meaning the all-student practice exam is coming up, and she would like the 5 of them to form a team. Shaun and Julius refuse to believe that Lihanna is suggesting that add Will to their team, and Will doesn't understand why Lihanna would bring him to a meeting when 2 of the people who hate him the most are right here. However, she still doesn't see how it's probably a bad idea, so Will realizes that she has no situational awareness. Shaun gets up to threaten Will, but before things get out of hand, Wignall waves his wand and casts some high-level illusion magic to get everyone to calm down. He then says there is no reason for Shaun to start acting so barbaric all of a sudden, and everyone should at least hear what Lihanna has to say before they do anything rash. Once everyone has calmed down, Lihanna tells them all that in preparation for the all-student practice, she wants to form a team with all the best students of the academy, as well as all the students who stood out at the festival. That's why Will's here, because he has skills which all of them lacks, so she judged that he would be a good addition to the team. Julius says he doesn't think it's a good idea since having someone like Will who can't use search would only slow them down. Just because Will admittedly smashed to Julius's face in, it doesn't mean he would be a valuable asset to the team. Shaun also doesn't want Will to join their team, but his reason is that he just doesn't like Will. Wignall thinks it's childishness for the 2 of them to reject Will because of their own petty grudges. Will has already proven that he can defeat both Shaun and Julius, so why do they think they have the right to look down on him? Will has incredible brute strength and monster-like agility, so why this methods may not be the most sophisticated? He was still able to outclass Julius and Shaun's most powerful magic. Julius takes a jab at Wignall for acting all high and mighty when he is only #2 in credits, but Wignall feels no shame in it and says that is precisely why he respects Lihanna's opinion as #1. If she says Will is skilled enough to be a part of their team, then Wignall will respect Will as well. However, he still doesn't respect either Julius or Shaun. Lihanna speaks up again and tells everyone that she wants to use this team to climb the tower as the top student in the academy. She wants to guarantee a better future for herself, but Will can't understand why she's going through all this trouble when her performance at the festival should have been more than enough to get her scouted by the tower. Lihanna admits that the Thunder Fashion did reach out to her, meaning she has a guaranteed post-graduation placement, but that isn't enough for her. All the students at the academy are basically the leftovers who aren't good enough to advance before graduation, and her family is common for mages to die young, so in order to prevent that fate for herself, she wants to aim for the top and become a Magiavander. She believes everyone here shares that same ambition, so she asks all who are interested in forming the team to place a coin in the goblet to show their commitment. Wignall is the first to accept her proposal since there's no team that could achieve better than this one. Julius agrees as well, since it will earn him more credits, and so does Shaun. The only one left is Will, and he is unsure what decision he should make. Late into the evening, Will finally returns to Rosti and Colette, and they've been worried sick about him since they had no idea where he went. Will doesn't explain where he has been, but he tells them that he has decided to join the Lihanna's team for the all-student practice. Later in class, Werkner is giving the students a briefing on the all-student practice, and tells them that the floors that used to be off-limits will now be unlocked, so students will now be able to go down to floors 7 through 10, meaning they can earn a lot more credits than they used to. This is an event where students can earn more than 1,000 credits all at once, so whether it's to make up for some missing credits or to earn some kind of achievement, this is truly a great opportunity for them, but they also need to be quite careful because there's still the chance that some of them may die. For example, last year 4 students ended up getting eaten by monsters. Steps have been taken to minimize risks by having professors stationed at key locations to ensure student safety, but that has never stopped people from finding new ways to get themselves killed. Later, Lehanna's team enters the dungeon, and for some reason Colette decided to tag along even though she wasn't invited, and when Lehanna pointed out, Colette gets defensive, saying she has to go wherever Will goes. Rosti also wanted to come, but since he's an artificer, he is required to stay at base camp for the entire duration of the exam. However, he still prepared a lot of magic items for Will, so that further delay the all-student practice exam begins. That brings the episode to an end. Thanks for watching. Want next part? Subscribe the channel and turn on notification bell.